welcome everyone. My name is Julia Silla. I'm the Director of Programs for QFI, Qatar Foundation International. We're really pleased to have you all with us today for this important conversation on dual language immersion and how it is facing the dual crises of COVID-19 and the racial justice movement here in the US and around the world. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. Please use the chat box to your right to submit questions at any point during our conversation today. We will monitor these, and we're leaving time at the end to hopefully get to as many as we can. There is a button to raise your hand, but we won't be able to call on attendees to speak during the session, so please type those questions in for us. We've also put our contact information at the end of the slides. Please feel free to follow up with us if you have other questions or want to continue the conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce briefly our esteemed panelists today. First, we have Dr. Karine Alaf, who's the Senior Program Advisor for Qatar Foundation International. Next, we have Dr. Myriam Met, who is a dual language immersion expert and consultant and has worked in for various entities in her esteemed career and very closely with QFI in the emerging Arabic dual language immersion movement. Next, we have Dawn Samples, who is the director of Avant More Learning, and we're really pleased to have her here. Also, she's worked with us as well as many immersion programs on proficiency assessment and best practices for teaching. Next, and but not least, we have Greg Roberts, the Director of Dual Language Studies at the American Council's Research Center. And Greg was instrumental in developing the dual language immersion, robust dual language immersion landscape in Utah in his former role for the state of Utah there. So I'm going to share our slides with you today. One moment. My slides took off without me. I need to back up. So just very briefly about QFI. QFI is an independent foundation that's based in Washington, D.C. We work with state-funded public and public charter schools. Our main missions are to both connect students with the Arab world and enhance the teaching of Arabic in the K-12 landscape in the United States. However, we also work in the so both throughout the US, also throughout the UK, Germany, and our partnerships in Qatar as well. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Karine.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. You know, the dual language immersion movement has been around for more than 20 years, although you can see from this slide, it's really picked up the pace in the last 20 years. These are the best estimates that we have. There's really not any concrete information available, but you can see that in 2000, there was about 260 dual language immersion programs across all languages, not Arabic back then, and that more so today, you have about 3,000 or over 3,000 dual language immersion programs across the country, including Arabic. If you go to the next slide, please, Julia. This goes to show QFI's involvement with Arabic dual language immersion programs. We've been involved since about 2013 when we were approached by the New York City Department of Education to help set up their first public school Arabic DLI program in Brooklyn. New York started at the kindergarten level and it's working its way up to the 8th grade level. They'll be opening up their 7th grade this fall. And in preparation for New York, it was our first foray as QFI into this world of Arabic DLI. We had the pleasure, actually Mimi and I, visiting the Institute for the Innovation for Second Language Education, EASLI, at Edmonton Public Schools in Canada. And so we've partnered up with them to learn from their programming. They've been doing Arabic immersion for, I think, close to 30 years up in Canada. So we had the pleasure of visiting them and learning from them as we started our work here in the US. And since New York City's opening of their doors with this public school program in Brooklyn, Houston, the Arabic Immersion Magnet School in Houston followed. And then we learned about Baltimore International Academy in Baltimore, Maryland has a program. And then most recently, the Elizabeth Learning Center in Los Angeles, California also has Arabic Immersion program, and QFI works closely with all these programs. Each of the schools does have a various models for their delivery of content, and their student populations also differs. But QFI, basically what we do is we offer them support in a variety of ways. But I would say the main way and the most important ways is the facilitating teachers and administrators at these schools to convene together and work together on the similar challenges and opportunities that they're facing. We also work with any schools or communities that are interested in opening up new programs, new Arabic DLI programs. And these have varied from Utah to Portland to Wisconsin to Washington, D.C., and helping them come up with proposals for their program, learning from the lessons learned from these schools that I've mentioned here. And next slide, please, Julia. And if you want to learn more about these schools that I've mentioned, we published an article earlier this year in the Language Educator Actfuls magazine that basically details each of the schools' models, student populations, and also summarizes some of the challenges and opportunities that we found working in this space for over the last 7 years. I'll pass it on now to Dr. Mimi Met. Oh, you're on mute, Mimi. But I'll mute her.
How are you doing? Okay, can we have the next slide, please? In case we didn't say it clearly enough, let me go back to one very important point about what dual language immersion is. Immersion is a form of schooling in which students are schooled for at least 50% of the school day in a language that is not their native language, not their mother tongue. So for many of our students, they may already know English and they want to add Arabic to their language repertoire. What makes immersion different from a foreign language program is that it is not a class where you learn the language. It's a class in which you follow the academic curriculum of the school and do that through the medium of another language. So Arabic is used to teach mathematics, social studies, science. We have schools where some students spend half a day in the target language, in their non-English language, studying all of the subjects that are allocated to that language, and half a day with an English teacher. So, some schools spend more than 50% of the school day in the non-English language. And it varies from school to school, but the defining characteristic of dual language immersion is schooling through the medium of another language as opposed to learning another language as a class. So the important thing about dual language that I want to emphasize today is how a significant number of benefits come out of immersion at no detriment to the student. So the student gets the same curriculum that they would be learning if they were educated in 100% monolingually. So that's what our first picture is. It's a basic education. In the second visual, you see the copy, you see the great brain on steroids, because we have an emerging amount of evidence. Well, I shouldn't say emerging because it's been around for a long time. We have increasing amount of evidence that the bilingual brain functions better than the monolingual brain. There have been studies that have been done on children who are bilingual from birth and studies that have looked at children who have added bilingualism either through direct contact in the social environment or through school. All of those studies have concluded that the bilingual brain at any level of bilingualism functions more effectively than the monolingual brain. For those of you who are attending this session, you may be happy to know that one of the research studies that showed powerful effects for young children in becoming bilingual is that it also showed that the symptoms of Alzheimer's do not make themselves manifest as early in bilinguals as they do in monolingual. So that was encouraging for me in particular. The studies have shown that students develop better skills in the better executive control functions, which if you think of the executive control function, it is like the traffic cop in your brain that tells you what to attend to. So actually some of the research is suggesting that bilingual kids are better multitaskers because they're able to divert attentional resources to the task that is most priority instead, so they're able to suppress stimuli that are not relevant to the task at hand. Other studies have shown better skills at divergent thinking, which is kind of like thinking outside the box, metalinguistic awareness, which is understanding that language is something that exists, not just as something that I do, but it is actually an abstract concept and is critical for students developing high levels of reading fluency as well. So in addition to these cognitive benefits, if we'll go to the next one, please, there is the benefit that you get that you develop very high levels of language proficiency. In fact, research has shown us that there is no form of learning another language in a school setting that surpasses the results that you can obtain in an immersion setting. Nothing beats immersion. So let's look at the next. One of the things that Greg is going to talk to you about, but I can't help but mention, is that these programs tend to attract a very diverse population. In many places where half the class may be native speakers of Arabic or native speakers of Spanish, and the other half native speakers of English, people who send their children to those programs are thinking about the language outcomes and the academic benefits. But it turns out that these are also programs that do an excellent job of attracting people to diverse, multicultural, not desegregated settings. That's been true in so many places where it's been used in magnet programs and in charter schools and other schools of choice to achieve that kind of diversity. Let's go to the next one, please. This graphic shows that the academic outcomes of dual language immersion are actually remarkable. And when I'm done with this slide, I'm going to share with you some examples of hard data coming from very large, well-conducted research studies on the outcomes on academic achievement in English, even when subject matter is taught through the medium of another language. Dual language students perform at least as well as monolingually educated students, but frequently outperform their monolingual peers in subjects, whether those subjects are taught in English or in the target language. And as I said, I'm going to share some of that research with you in just a minute, so I won't spend more time on that. But here is the other big benefit about dual language immersion. Julia, please. The cost of all of these benefits is lower than the cost of any other form that focuses on only one of these benefits. For example, there is no form of language learning that is less expensive to implement than a dual language program, by miles and miles of differences. So this is one of the reasons that we're seeing such great expansion of dual language programs, is that you're getting 4 bangs for a single buck. Can we go to the next slide, please? So one of the problems that we have in getting dual language programs to expand is, quite frankly, district leaders and sometimes parents and other educators are really skeptical about the outcomes of dual language immersion. And I get it. My own superintendent, when I worked as an administrator in a school system, said to me, you know, this just doesn't make sense. How can you possibly take a bunch of kids and teach them fourth grade math in a language they don't know and have them do as well, if not better, than kids are learning fourth grade math in a language they do know? Another superintendent told me that it's hard to believe that students who need to learn English learners in dual language programs, spend at least half a day not learning in English. Sometimes as much as 90% of the school day is taught through the medium of another language, but yet they're outperforming kids who spend a whole day in English. So twice as much time in English, if you're in a 50-50 program where half a day in English and half a day in Arabic. If you're that kid, you spend 50% of your school day learning in Arabic, twice as much time, you're still doing better in English than kids who spend twice as much time in English. So to show you some data, I'm going to go very, very quickly now through a number of studies. There is a handout in the files section on the session page for EWA, where the resources, the data sources for each of these studies was done. What I'm going to do is go through them very quickly. I'm not going to explain anything. And Julia, could you go to the next slide? All I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about the study, and then I have highlighted for you the things that I'd like you to look at, and then I'm going to move on to the next slide. So this first set of studies was done in North Carolina with testing data from 2009. And as you can see, the size of the population tested was substantial, a large N. And these were the population of students who were included in this study. And as you can see, some of these populations were historically underperforming or underserved by our schools. So let's go to the next slide. And what I'm going to ask you to do in each of the next 3 slides is look only at the red bars, because the red bars represent the students who were enrolled in the dual language program, and the green and blue bars represent their peers who were in other types of programs. And the full study, as I said, would be available to you to follow up with, but these are students who are learners of English, what some people call ESL learners. Notice how well the EL students are doing in comparison to their peers who were matched, who are attending monolingual programs. Next slide. African American students who, as we know, there has been a great deal written about closing the achievement gap. Look at how well African American students are performing in dual language programs compared to African American students not in dual language. And let's look at the third one. Again, just look at the red bars. Students with exceptionalities, students who are diagnosed special needs learners, also doing well in dual language immersion compared to students who are not in dual language. Next slide, please. This study was done in Portland Public Schools, and it was a study that compared students, 2 groups of students, all of whom had applied to be in a dual language program, but some made it into the dual language program through a lottery and some did not. So what this study did was equated dual language applicants, lottery winners and lottery losers. And all were tested in English using standardized tests. So let's take a look at what we found in Portland. And I've highlighted in yellow what I think you should find interesting. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, not highlighted, okay. Students in 5th grade were 7 months ahead in English reading than in the lottery winner group, and 9 months ahead in reading in English by the 8th grade than lottery losers. So they all came in the same. The only difference was who got in and who didn't. The same piece of information that, same study, next slide, please. is that English language learners by 6th grade were leaving ESL services at a much faster rate than students who were not in dual language programs. And if a student's native language matched the dual language, such as a Spanish speaker in a dual language program, this was even accelerated. So teaching native children in Spanish who are already Spanish speakers accelerated their learning of English. Next slide. All right, these are data from Utah, and it's about 26,000 students. And could we have the first red star, please, Julia? The dual language students grew about the same in English language arts by 4th grade as non-dual language students. So no harm done. They got everything else plus everything they would have gotten in English plus the foreign language. And here's the one that, and in math, where the students were taught completely in the target language, they're significantly outperforming kids who were taught in English and tested in English. Okay, next slide. And this study also, like the one I cited for you from North Carolina, special ed youngsters who participated in the DLI program were outperforming special ed kids who were not in DLI. So let's go to the next slide, which I believe will show you. Oh, okay. So I thought we had a slide here that showed you the resources that were used to set up these slides for the data, but you can access the actual citations on the EWA website. Okay, Dawn.
Okay, thank you, Mimi. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is to just follow up on some of the things Mimi was addressing in terms of why these programs are of such value and have brought so much to the communities and the schools where we have these programs and where we've seen such success. To talk a little about the challenges that COVID-19 has brought into our world. And I know these are challenges that are not new to any part of education right now. But Immersion happens to be a program that does take a lot of rigorous training for teachers, for administrators. It's a program that already has a lot of challenges that are inherent to the program anyway. And COVID-19 has thrown quite a monkey wrench into some of those things. So I just want to share with you some of the things that we're facing and some of the strategies and ideas that we've had in trying to address some of those. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Julia. So one of the things that you'll hear me refer to we, and for the most part, when I say we, I'm referring to a task force that has, in large part, thanks to Greg Roberts, been pulled together from the National Dual Language Immersion Alliance, where we've pulled together researchers, practitioners, teachers, administrators, experts in the field to try to cultivate resources, materials, find out what the needs are, what the obstacles are, and try to pool all of our brain power and resources together to leverage those. And so at times you'll hear me mentioning we, and a lot of times that's who I'm referring to. So the three primary areas that I want to address are these three that you see here, where we have a real sense of urgency to support these areas so that we can protect and preserve these programs. You'll see that they're not going to look that different than what you would expect in any other area. We're just going to look at this through the lens of immersion and what it means to support these programs through an immersion lens. So looking at providing ongoing learning while obviously trying to protect the health and the well-being of students, trying to preserve the integrity of the things that yield those results that Mimi was just showing you. Those don't just happen by mistake. They happen by having some very intentional practices put into place. And COVID-19 has challenged a lot of those structures and practices. So finding ways to still be able to have a program with integrity that's going to deliver the results that we know we can get out of these programs. And also trying to figure out ways to do that in who knows how many different learning scenarios that are out there right now. And all of this, this success of being able to do these things is contingent on the social and emotional well-being of our students and our teachers and our educators. So we're going to look at these 3 areas primarily. You can go ahead to the next slide, Julia. So first, in looking at grappling with the physical safety and logistics of having an immersion program, you know, Mimi was talking about how in these programs, at a very minimum, 50% of the learner's instructional day is in another language. And logistically, that's already a challenge to provide that in a regular school setting, because it means having various schedules that have to be modified for immersion. Teacher training, it requires some very intensive fundamental practices that are really just really good, strong teaching practices anyway, but then in immersion are essential. They're just non-negotiable and they have to happen. So being able to look at what a daily schedule might look like and grappling with, is this schedule going to be in a face-to-face setting? Is it going to be in a hybrid setting where perhaps some of the time it's virtual, some of the time it's face-to-face, or in a setting where some of your students are virtual and other students are face-to-face, all the while attending to all the new routines and requirements that are put in place to keep the students safe. Just alone the time that will be given to training the students in how to be safe in the classroom with new routines for hand washing and how they interact with each other and how they have to either dress, leave shoes at the door, or just so many things, especially in an elementary setting that are already going to be huge adjustments. Attempting to do all of these things and maintain the integrity of staying in the language and even having all of the language to be able to do all these things. These are all just compacted layers of things that we're grappling with as we're talking with school districts and teachers about how to set up a schedule that can still work in so many different possible environments. One of the things that we know is key is that we have to, at all costs, try to maintain strong pedagogical practices and protect time in the language for the students. The moment that we start to slip in the amount of time and practice that we can give students in the language, we know that that creates a gap in how well they can perform in the academic content because they're expected to do that in the language. So finding ways to make that language input and that practice for output accessible and something that becomes part of whatever the new reality is in whatever scenario you're in is a real obstacle to grapple with right now. And one size will not fit all. So looking at the resources that we have within each building, with teachers, with resources, with training, and then trying to look at how we can help maybe leverage those practices and resources on a national level to give districts ideas and administrators hope that they'll be able to preserve these programs. That's part of where we are, and we know that this is going to be a process that we have to just continue to work through collectively, all of us together, as we enter into this new year this year. You can go on to the next slide, Julia. So in the second part, talking about being able to continue learning in the different scenarios, one of the things that has been a real focal point for conversation when I've worked and talked with school districts and administrators is I've had experience working as a distance learning teacher. And one of the things that in my own experience that I've known is that you can't just lift what you're used to doing and make it virtual, because it just won't sustain and work and be engaging that way. So we have to rethink how we are delivering instruction and engaging students. But we don't need to stop doing those fundamental practices that are just good, strong pedagogical practices. Those stay true no matter what the environment is. Those are things that we just know about how people learn, how children learn. And so those practices don't change. The tools for delivery and the tools for engagement are what change. And that is something that most teachers have not had as much experience with. Most administrative teams and curriculum writing teams have not had a whole lot of experience with shifting things into that kind of environment. And so finding ways to help support that learning for the teachers, for administrators, but also for the parents and community members who are on their end having to support and carry some of that learning load themselves from home. So finding new ways to look at the resources you have, you know, in a traditional immersion classroom, you might, in a 50-50 program where half of the students are native English speakers and the other half may be native speakers of other languages, mostly the language of the program. Usually you may have 2 teachers. Well, if everyone is virtual, looking at all of your teachers as a team and all of your resources as a pool, and then finding ways to leverage who is doing what, who is meeting with who. It may be that what you end up with looks like a completely different structure, but it might actually work that way best to meet the needs of the learners. Redistributing your teachers to meet with groups of students in a new way, or provide resources and learning times of day or of the week in a different way. I think that in some ways it could be liberating to think that the learning is a constant, but time and space are variables. And so how can we take advantage of the time and space as a variable to keep that learning moving forward as a constant? That's the challenge, and that's a challenge for everyone in every area, but in immersion it is especially challenging when you have all the layers of maintaining that language and maintaining that practice in the language. Okay, moving on to the last slide. I do want to talk just a little bit about the social emotional learning and support needs that are out there. One thing that we know in immersion is that, or not just in immersion, in learning, is that anxiety is the enemy of learning. It can shut down learning for anyone. And anxiety happens to be something that a lot of times immersion programs struggle with a little bit. It can be intimidating to be in a classroom where your teacher is speaking completely in another language. And so we've done a lot of work to make the language comprehensible for students and lower that anxiety level, and to support teachers to help them learn how to build relationships with students so that they can feel safe to take risks. Also being able to identify the needs of students, the social emotional needs of students, and where they're coming from. When we layer COVID-19 on top of all of this, there's so many other things that surface. And there many districts and states have already been doing a lot of research in this area for creating support materials, training for teachers, curriculum that kind of lays over every content area so that teachers can work to meet the needs of the students. Now we're also having to look at what those needs look like in a pandemic. And, you know, how do we help make our students feel safe to even come to school, or to engage and interact with each other or with their teacher? Or how can teachers identify the needs of their students virtually when they may not be able to really read into the body language or the signs or signals that students may be giving them? And also laying on top of that the fact that for many of these students, they fall into very high risk categories, not only for maybe not even showing up for school, but also they're high risk for infection. a lot of times, depending on where they are or what kind of environment they're living in and engaging with publicly. And so how to find ways to help our teachers and immersion programs read between the lines and identify these students so they don't fall through the cracks, so that we can protect them and create support for them and maintain immersion. So right now, I don't know that there are a lot of answers for all of this. There's certainly a million questions for how we're going to do all of this. But I think that we do have a really good start with a lot of really smart people who are graciously volunteering their time to try and support these programs and keep them moving forward and meet the needs of the students and the teachers in these programs. So I'm going to pass the baton on to Greg.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to move super quickly because my illustrious colleagues have only left me with 7 minutes. So let's go, but I've left lots of links in here and lots of text. Next slide, please. So first of all, we have to distinguish there's a big difference between equality and equity. And I think that visual picture tells it all. And I think if you look at the picture, you'll get it. There's obviously the definitions there, but I don't have time to read them to you. So we'll move to the next slide. Okay, we at American Councils are working with the research project with Qatar right now, QFI, and we're very thrilled about that. But we have also worked with other partners in the past. One of them was UCLA, and about 1.5 years ago, through the generosity of a Spencer Grant Foundation, we were able to partner with UCLA for a Confronting the Equity Issues in Dual Language Immersion program 2-day seminar hosted at UCLA. We invited 35 experts from all over the country. Some were practitioners, some were university research people, others were leaders of language organizations. And we structured the 2 days around 4 major areas. One was program planning, the other was curriculum, recruitment and development of the right kind of teachers, and then race, social justice, and power equity. So next slide, please. We haven't got time to go through all of these recommendations and findings, but here are 4 of the main ones. And if you see at the bottom of the page, there's a link there that we just published a report last year. It's about a 29-page report where you can see some of the recommendations. But the first recommendation is we really need a dual language immersion census. We have no idea really how many programs are out there, what type of programs they are, what type of languages are being used. 3,000 is the best estimate from a lot of national experts, but really that is a crapshoot. And any of you who play craps knows what that means. Then the other thing we really need to work on is teacher development, because we're talking about a different type of teacher for a dual language immersion classroom, because they have to be in a classroom that's very diverse, both racially, linguistically, on many levels. And that takes a lot of additional skills. So we really need to work with teacher development programs. We also need to create a network that can be kind of a clearinghouse for information. We have tried that at American Councils with our National Dual Language Immersion Research Alliance, but we need more of these type of clearinghouses to really share the findings and what we learn. And then we need equal access to program. Coming from Utah, where we started both 2-way programs, which are very equitable, and 1-way programs, which are really not, dual language immersion programs struggle to balance the demands from advantage and disadvantaged parents to access these programs. There's been a large gentrification across this country recently in dual language immersion, where only certain select kids, high achievers, get to stay in the program. Low achievers, kids with special needs, somehow are weeded out, or it's all about English only programs. We need to really get back to the roots of dual language immersion and make sure kids have all access. Dual language is immersion for all kids, no matter what their linguistic, racial, or other backgrounds might be. So please read that report. And next slide, please. One of the great things about dual language immersion, and Mimi touched on this briefly, it's about how it's really a tool for equity. It's probably one of the most powerful tools we have for desegregation. Over the last probably 10 to 15 years, we've seen schools segregate in this country, really boutique programs, neighborhood programs. But what dual language immersion can do is bringing diverse communities together. It can bring the suburban parent into the inner city to be part of this program. It can take from one side of a district to another side of a district to really make the district integrated. What we really want to do is make sure that all students are welcome, especially students of color, but also students of low SES backgrounds. We really want to give the opportunity to all students, and dual language immersion can do that. Next slide. Here are some of the positive desegregation implementations that we actually see happening when dual language immersion is implemented correctly. It creates a system and structure to reduce racial and socioeconomic isolation by bringing communities and students together. It produces opportunities for these children to build relationships across these racial and ethnic lines in two languages. And I mean, two languages is very important. And then finally, it builds positive relationships with educators and staffs and the parents in the community. Parents in dual language immersion tend to be more engaged in their schools, and that really is a very positive thing. But the other thing it really kind of does is it crafts a faculty and staff that's much more diverse because of the type of teacher that is needed. We now have something that happens more and more where teachers actually start to look like the teachers they're teaching, which is not happening all across the US. We need a much more diverse teaching faculty in this country. And I think I am almost out of time. So end the slide on the Q&A and I'll turn it back over to Julia. And I left a lot out, but please go to those links, or you can email me and I'll answer any other questions. I have tons of information I can send you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Greg. And actually, I'm going to turn it back to you really briefly. If you could address, we did have a question around special education students and low performing students that are, can they, if they're being weeded out of programs, especially at K-2 levels in dual language immersion programs, and if that's something that could be essentially skewing data or showing us a different picture. And I don't know from your experience in Utah, if you could speak about that. I'm going to unmute you before you start, Greg. Hold on. There you go.
Okay, actually, Mimi alluded to some of the data, but we have data from Canada that shows that special education students do far better in immersion than they would in monolingual education. We also have data out of North Carolina and Utah that show that students of special needs do much better in immersion than they do in monolingual education. We have problems out there, and I will admit it, in some school districts trying to weed out kids in special ed or kids that move at a slower pace because they want to make the immersion program an elitist program. That is a major problem, and districts need to stop that behavior. In Utah, we always said that you have to, your population needs to be as diverse as the school population, so you should not be weeding out special ed kids. You should not be weeding out kids that move a little bit slower. So that is a major problem. Email me, I can send you more info.
Thank you so much, Greg. And really, so many thanks to our esteemed panelists. It was really fascinating conversation, and I think really topical and relevant given the challenges and also the opportunities especially with equity and the dual language immersion program opportunities throughout the United States. And QFI has been really thrilled to be involved at the grassroots level, working with schools and teachers, families, and communities. And just as we end, I should have included a photo. Karine and I were lucky enough to attend the promotion ceremony for PSIS 30 at the end of this year that they had to do online. Oh, Dawn and Mimi too, that they had to do online, unfortunately, because of COVID. But lucky for us, we actually got to be a part of it because it was online. And just to see the relationships between the students and teachers, and the teachers who were crying to say goodbye to some of the students who were moving on to the next level. It was truly meaningful. And I think it's also those teacher relationships with students and families that has actually been so important and even more powerful during COVID, when you're trying to make relationships online, or sustain relationships online and keep kids connected to learning. Having those relationships has been just fundamentally important And so it's really a labor of love, and I know it is for all of you as well. So I just want to thank you again, and thanks to EWA for allowing us to host this panel today. We hope you found it interesting, and I hope that you have a good rest of your evening and enjoy the next session. Thank you.